Let's get on to the official stuff. This is 152, instant response. And so I want to start with the chapters in the book, discovering the scope of the incident, and then live data collection. And then I'll demonstrate some of the coming up projects. So let's get to here. All right, so the first thing you have to do when you discover that something bad is happening on your network is to decide how big the incident is. So the first thing you do is get some initial data and some preliminary evidence, and then you decide what to do. The first question is, how big is it? Is the problem still getting worse? Then you have to contain the fire so it stops getting worse. So you look at the original alert that came from, you have some kind of alert that came from an antivirus product or something. Look at the original data, because the person who reported it to you might not have gotten it all. I must say, I think at least 3/4 of the questions I get, maybe it's down to only 40% now, are, gee, I tried to do the project and I got an error message. What should I do? And that's all the information I get. I don't have enough information to help. And it's the same thing. You'll get a report from some person who may not have really recorded everything you need to know. Then look at other systems to see what they found and see if you can figure out more about what's going on. So figure out what sources are available, and the point is you have to find sources that are easy to analyze, not just an entire RAM capture from some device that will give you 1,000 running processes and you don't have any clue which one to look at. Something simple related to the alert that maybe will quickly give you some kind of clue what's going on here. So if you have malware, look for files or registry keys that might have directly created things in the Windows prefetch. This will show you what was recently launched on that machine. Browser history, that kind of thing would help. Network artifacts like firewall logs, you go from whatever you got, and you have an alert, and the alert has a timestamp, so now you know the location of something happening and a time when it happened, so you can zero in and look at logs at that time and try to find more information about what's happened here. So if you can get multiple independent sources, it's better. Then you'll reach more reliable conclusions. And of course, the attacker might be trying to cover their traces. So they might, for example, delete the Windows event logs, but they probably won't be able to delete the firewall event logs or your archives on your Splunk server or something. So you, by cross-checking information, you may learn things that the attacker tried to conceal. They might still be in the system, causing more damage. So get a detection method. This is what I've talked about a lot. This is the point of malware analysis, is to analyze malware to find indicators of compromise. You want to find some way to tell if a machine is infected, some way that is not too difficult to do, like a file that's created, a registry key that's created, some kind of network traffic that's created. Then you quickly scan all the machines to see if they have that, and you'll know how many machines are also infected. So when you're choosing a course of action, try to choose something that will further your investigation, giving you useful information, and it will give you an answer quickly, not just be a huge project that you have to try to dig through, because in the early stages, you're really trying to quickly find out how big is this problem, how bad is it. And make sure that you are not just jumping to a conclusion, but that you're following the evidence. This is hard to do. In normal troubleshooting, you just go by remembering what the most common problem is, and you have to be more careful than that, because you're dealing with an intelligent attacker. Sometimes you got a stupid thing that's easy, but sometimes you got an intelligent attacker that is trying to fool you. So consider whether you're really staying objective, using multiple independent sources of evidence, and then decide if you have found something that is so important you must immediately do something about it. Like somebody is currently destroying systems, somebody is currently stealing confidential data, then even if you haven't figured out what else is going on, you really need to stop that before proceeding. That's an emergency, You can violate most of the rules to deal with the emergency. Same thing's true of police, by the way. Police are allowed to violate search warrants and many other things, like if a house is on fire or somebody's screaming for help, they're allowed to kick in the door and go in there. They don't have to wait for a court order or anything. That's called exigent circumstances. In case of an emergency, you can break the usual rules. And the same thing applies here. So here's another scenario. So you got a large online retailer, and customers say that after they sign up and join your online shopping, now they're getting spam. So now that's just what customers say. So in the old days, the first thing everyone would say is, oh, just ignore the customers, they're idiots or something, and that's an option. But here's things you might consider. You might call the customers and interview them more and try to see if you believe it. But that's still might not convince you, and of course they might not appreciate having weird people call them back they don't know. That might be an invasion of their privacy. Probably a better solution is to make fake customer accounts, and this is such a great solution that this is what the company thinks Canary does. They give hardware to plug in your network you can buy that will pretend to be servers and will alert you when they get hacked, and they give you like email addresses and URLs and stuff that you put in your database and on your network that you're not using that they're listening for. And when somebody sends an email to that address, you know they stole your data because that's where it was. So this is a very good idea. Put in fake accounts that are not in use and give them something like random long usernames so that nobody would send email there by accident. And now if anybody sends data to those accounts, you know they are stealing your data from your system. And you even know which system they stole it from, and you even more or less know what time they stole it. You know what time you put it there. So you can learn a lot that way. So find out where the data is. It turns out the data is on a production server, and then it's sent to a marketing firm. So they could be stealing it at either end. So if you interview your people, you got a commercial database that's a big database running a ton of traffic, and the records could come in directly by the website or by a phone call into customer service. So there's several places it could happen. There are backups too. Somebody could in principle be stealing from the backups, and somebody could be stealing from your marketing firm that you're sending data. Well, any of these are possible. So the marketing firm you can exclude because customers complained of spam before the data was sent to the marketing firm. So that's not the answer. And stealing data from the telephone, from verbal telephone calls, is possible, but nobody wants to do that because you have to listen to a phone call to get one email address instead of getting into some server and stealing a million of them. It's very ineffective. So it's probably somewhere on the database. Now, but you don't want to capture network packets at a database because they're probably encrypted, and even if they aren't, that's far too much data. What you want to do is query monitoring. So you can run an extra query that will create a special sort of log file answering a certain question. And your log file will be something like record all the email addresses added to this from this date to that date or something. So, all right. Now, another possibility, of course, is you have an insider. Somebody in your company is deliberately stealing the emails and passing them on. That could be true, but there's no immediate way to test for that. You could have your website infected with something like a keylogger that's stealing the email addresses, and it could be somebody copying the backup tapes. So, of course, you can put fake accounts, add them to the database from bypassing the web form, and add some fake accounts to the backups. And now you wait and see which of those get spam, and you'll see which way it came out. This is a famous old trick used for a lot of purposes. I've heard people call it a barium meal. There was a famous celebrity years ago somebody was leaking her baby pictures out, so she sent different pictures to each of her friends to see which ones leaked to the tabloids, and then she knew which of her friends was leaking her stuff, that kind of thing. So wait a couple weeks and spam starts coming in. So it goes to the accounts in a database and the accounts manually entered in a database, so the website is not the problem. It does not go to the accounts that were only on the backup tape, so it's not the backup tape, and all this sounds extremely plausible. All right, so now you got new theories. Either somebody is on your database server with malware, that's one possibility, or they're perhaps monitoring the network, but network level packet captures are very inefficient and clumsy and difficult to do. It's far more likely that they are, and it's hard for you to do. Like I said, the most likely thing for you to do to catch them is to log what the database does. So now add some more fake accounts, find out where the data is stored, go through the logs, and try to see what's happening on the database server. And you find no evidence of any extra database server functionality stealing addresses. So 2 weeks later, new people get spam, retrieve the query logs, and you find finally there is a query which sent all the customer email within a certain date out somewhere. So this happens, it only runs periodically, and it was a remote query launched from the graphics art department. And the graphics art department, so now you have a clue, somebody in your company, some machine in your company is sending the data. So now you got a 2-week cycle of data theft, and queries are being made over the network from a computer in the graphics arts department. And it uses an ID that belongs to a database administrator, not the person in the graphics art department. So now you've got some nice clues that give you some information what to do. So obviously you want to collect data from that machine that appears to be infected or being abused somehow. So collect the image. And of course, one classic thing you do is once you've narrowed it down, you archive all the data to make sure you've got it for later investigation and perhaps for use in court. So you get the whole memory and the whole hard drive of that machine. That machine is clearly involved, so you record all the evidence from it to make sure you've got it. Then talk to the user, find out if they've got any clues that something bad happened on their machine, like a malware infection or if it was stolen or something. The database server, you get a live response. You can't really get a hard disk response from a typical database server, but you can preserve the logs anyway. That would be the logical thing to do. And so, examining the image that you got from there, you can find malware. Now you've got remote control malware coming in from a foreign IP address. It's been there for 2 years, so this 2 years ago, somebody on that laptop clicked on a link or something, got it infected, and somebody's been messing at your network for years. Probably sending spam to your customers for years and similar relatively non-destructive things that you wouldn't get caught by. Remember, the average time it takes from when a company gets hacked to when they realize it is 270 days. This is very common, that you find out you've been hacked and you realize you've actually been hacked for a really long time without noticing. Unless they do something really bad like a DDoS attack or wipe out a server, you could very well not notice them. They'd just be a little more activity on your network, moving data around. If they don't do anything too obnoxious, you might not notice them for years. So now you just examine all the other computers and see if they've got the malware on them. Look at the firewall logs to see if other people are communicating to that IP address, and hopefully you can determine how bad it is. It's a pretty uneasy feeling. Somebody's been wandering through your network for 2 years, but it's pretty common. And as you can see, these measures probably don't really mean you 100% get rid of them or anything. You do what you can. Anyway, here's things that could go wrong. You could start hunting for extra copies of the customer data all over the network, assuming somebody is copying it to another machine in there. And that's a pretty foolish idea because you don't know that it's copied to a different company machine before it goes out. Even if that was happening, it would probably be compressed. This is the kind of foolish idea that wastes your time doing a big, complicated job that is not going to quickly narrow down the problem. Another thing you could do is jump to the conclusion that someone in your company is doing something bad deliberately. So now you'd be reviewing personnel files, trying to determine who is disloyal, background checks, video surveillance, all this stuff. This is madness, of course. This is what tends to destroy companies when you get paranoid like this. That's a witch hunt. Large effort, small chance of success, a lot of collateral damage. And also, I would say, not entirely wise because you're probably not really skilled in that area. That's like psychology and stuff. Anyway, another unwise path would be to focus on the database server to hunt for malware there, but that's really hard to do on a database server. And again, you've jumped to a conclusion. So that's the thing. You have to avoid that and instead ask reasonable questions where you can get an answer quickly that help you guide you to an answer, guided by the evidence, not by conclusions you just jump to. So here's another one. Automated clearinghouse. A bank, essentially. They move money around, and somebody tried to move $183,000 out of the bank. So that's not good. The CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, supposedly authorized this transfer, but he says he didn't. So somebody is managing to make unauthorized transfers from the bank. This one didn't go through, but you certainly need to find out what happened. So it was done from that person's bank account, and you know the time and the day it happened, so that's good. Now you can look at IP addresses. The IP address was your public IP address. So somebody sent the traffic from your network to the bank using his account. All right. The firewall, you look there. That's one good thing to look at, obviously, see if you can find anything interesting. You could copy all the data from the CFO's laptop computer at this point, but you don't really know it was his computer. Again, there could be other computers involved, so it's probably not time to jump to that yet. Looking at the firewall logs, you can see two computers logged in, making a number of connections from two different IPs. One is the CFO's office, and the other is not immediately recognized. So you go to collect the evidence from the CFO's computer, and then, because now you know this computer is pretty clearly involved, collect the evidence and preserve it, and then try to find the other IP address, go into the DHCP logs. DHCP shows that that is the wireless card of the CFO's laptop. So now you have two things happening from the same computer. It seems like there's only one computer involved in all this. So now you interview the CFO, and he carried his laptop to another room and connected with the wireless card, which is why he had two different IP addresses on the same day. And he says he didn't do it, but it clearly is coming from his machine. So you have firewall logs, you have live response data, memory, and hard drive to examine. And so you got theories. Somebody snuck into his office and used his computer. You could look to see if there are security cameras or something, or log in events. Maybe there's undetected malware. That sounds a lot more likely. And you can check that by looking at Windows artifacts. Since you have an open office plan, nobody could really sneak into his office and use his machine, most likely. That doesn't seem like a likely solution. So go to examine the data you took from the computer, and you find malware. There's a persistent executable, something that restarts when the machine restarts, and they send it to someplace like VirusTotal, and it's Zeus. Zeus is common banking malware that lives on a system, places it under remote control, so now you know his machine is infected and being used by somebody else to do bad things. So again, you do a scan of all the computers, looking for a quick live response, things like file names and registry keys, to see if other people are infected by the same thing, or if other machines are sending traffic to the IP address the malware communicates with. That's the scoping, to determine how big the problem is. And so here's things that could have gone wrong. This is a fairly common thing. I don't know if anybody believes this anymore, but maybe 5 years ago and earlier, people really trusted their antivirus. And they would say, there can't be any viruses. We run antivirus. You can exclude that. I think people have realized that is manifestly not true, especially if you get into pen testing. You'll learn how to sneak stuff past antivirus all the time. So, but if people believe that, then they'd say, it must be at the bank we're communicating with. The bank up there has someone bad, so yell at them and tell them that they are the person doing it bad, because our company is clean because we use antivirus. That's an unwise position to take. All right. And by the way, waiting for a third party to do something is, of course, not usually very productive unless you have strong evidence that the problem is really at a third party. That's likely to just be a way of avoiding your job. Another unwise path would be to determine the CFO must be guilty. They must be lying. They must be stealing from us. We're going to investigate this human. And of course, now you've got problems. That's a whole other kind of investigation, like real detective work. What are you going to do? Bug his house, follow him home, investigate his bank account to see if he's getting bribes and all that jazz. And again, that's something that really should go to a different kind of investigator. And you should have some more evidence of that. Exclude simpler things like malware first. So anyway, let's take a look at some cahoots about that. Looks like I better wait a few more seconds. All right. All right. So Coke is sure Pepsi did it. So what should you do? You should find alternate theories. I mean, your customer doesn't get to tell you who's guilty. They hire you to investigate, and you have to look at the evidence and see. You can't just assume that what they tell you is true. You aren't really serving them in that case. They need to be educated. Look, you can't just tell me who did it. You have to let me examine the evidence, and let's see if they did it. Anyway. All right, so Mint is hacked. This really happened. Mint's Linux. They were hacked, and people are downloading infected, modified versions of Mint. So what should you do? Right, that's an emergency. You don't need to investigate anything further. The first thing you do is stop that. You can't let your customers continue to download poison files. You got to stop that and then carry on with your investigation. All right. All right. So the database server logs show suspicious queries, and the administrator wants to image the storage area network. So what would you do? Yeah, a storage area network is too big to image like that, so you're not wasting your time going in the wrong direction. You have found some evidence that there's something wrong in the database server, but you need to find a more efficient way to get evidence from it, like running queries on it or finding other logs or something. Something less extreme than imaging the whole SAN. All right, your CEO demands that you hack the attacker back. A lot of people like to talk about this. There are books about it. What should you do? There you go. I've had this happen. I think everybody's had this happen in this business where a customer demands that you break the law. It's quite common. And you quit. You say, look, I'm not going to break the law. I can find another customer. You can go pound sand. I'm not going to break the law for you. Yeah, anyway. All right. And of course, there are some people that do things like that and get away with it for a while, but it's not a recommended practice. All right. I know who wrote it is. JR, I assume that's initials. I know who this is. So JR, my grader may figure out who you are from your initials, but you might want to give me a longer name to make sure that she finds you, if you care about the points. Anyway, so live data collection, what we keep talking about, how collecting information that is less extreme than all the RAM and all the hard drive, running a query, a script that will harvest some information from the machine. That's the point. You're trying to preserve evidence, and you're trying to get a quick amount of answers. So you get log files, listing of all the files, listing of all the running processes, network connections, things like that that are not gigabytes of data. And so you want to do this quickly. You want to not alter the system that you're measuring, and you don't want to crash the system or burden it so that people can't continue using it. So if you believe that there's information on here that you need, which is extremely common, this is the number one most common thing you do is the live response. You do arrange it so it doesn't modify the thing it's investigating too much, and it doesn't slow it down too much. And you don't, this is a less perfect but easier and simpler alternative to the old-fashioned complete forensic image, all the RAM and all the hard drive, which is almost always too big. You only want to do that when you've really narrowed down the number of systems to a small number. And this is almost always the case, that a forensic duplication will take too much time, take a long time anyway. And now, on the other hand, if you are really worried about legal issues, you may very well need to have forensic quality evidence to take to court, and you might just want a full response hard drive and RAM for that reason. So once you get down to having like a suspect machine and having some data that you think is going to go to court, then okay, good. I have some information here about a name. I have recorded it. Good. All right. Anyway, so all right, and so here's the risks. So test the live response. In live response, you typically do something like write a script that will run on the machine, which will harvest the data and send it back to you. So test that on a similar system. Make sure that it doesn't crash the system. Make sure you are approved to do this. You're running some software on a system. It might have unintended consequences. Make sure you have approval to collect the data and approval to run this process on the machine, which might in principle disrupt business or crash it or something. All right. It's good to get approvals in writing. I remember I wanted to do a vulnerability scan at the college, and I got approval, and then we ran the scan, and then it brought a bunch of things down. And then I thought, I didn't get that in writing. I probably should have got that in writing. Anyway, so live response is the modern way to do it, and it's not as perfect as the static response, where you kick out the plug and image the hard drive. Then you get one copy of the data, and it's perfect, and you can reproduce it all the way down to the same MD5 hash. Live response is not that way. You're running a process on the system. If you run it again, timestamps have changed and stuff, you'll get a different answer. So it's not as perfect, but this is the more common thing people do these days. So you cannot say, I did no modification of the system. You've run another process on it. You try to say, I did the minimum possible modification of the system, but you can't get it to zero. You can just write a JAWS script or Bash if you're using Linux, or Perl or Python or anything, just to write a script that harvests what you want. That's perfectly fine. There are tools available. Our main response tool is going to be Velociraptor, which I'm hoping I can demonstrate today, but we may only get to where I'm showing you how to set up the machines to put it on. Velociraptor is fantastic and wonderful. It makes it easy to do live response. Much easier than having to write your own scripts, so you'll find it a lot of fun. So you want to see if your tool is generally accepted. Does it really cover the operating systems you have? If you're going to use operating system commands, this book recommends using a copy of those commands, not trusting the version of the commands that's on the system. That's an interesting idea. It's probably a good practice. I know Velociraptor does in fact use those tools, and so do the scripts I've run. I never worried about that, but they're right. That might in principle be a good idea. All right, make sure you're collecting important data in your environment. Make sure that you're not spending too long collecting data, especially if you have a large fleet of machines, and then see if you get output that you can easily review and understand. So here's things to collect. You want the current running states, you want running processes, network connections, all the logs, lists of files, registry keys, things like that. You get a sort of common list if you just look at any malware report and see what people have for indicators of compromise. It's always pretty much the same kind of thing. Some people try to collect everything, all the RAM and all the hard drive from every machine, but of course that will take a ton of time and just produce a mountain of data that you don't have enough time to examine. This is highly inefficient. You would not want to do this. You want to avoid this as much as possible, unless you are somehow unable to do anything else. That is doing everything really the hard way. So you want the time date, especially the time zone. A lot of attackers like to change the time setting on the machine to conceal their evidence, and you do need to know the right time on every machine so you can organize logs, information about the system, and all the auto runs that automatically launch, all the scheduled tasks, user accounts, and memberships of groups to see if there are extra accounts, network data, all the network information, and all the drivers, files and open handles running, processes, login history, all the system logs, application logs, and a list of all the files with timestamps and owners. These are all just natural things to have. All of those are likely to have suspicious entries if somebody's messing around on that machine. And then you could do complete RAM capture. This is less of a burden than complete hard disk capture, but still overkill in many cases. Not what you'd normally do for live response. So first you'd do live response to find some suspicious machines, and then if you have a small number of suspicious machines, like in those scenarios we just went through, you might choose them and do the full RAM capture. So again, practice your RAM capture tool on another system to make sure it's working. Learn how fast it is. Figure out how to handle problems, like if that machine has gone to sleep and is locked, or if it's got broken components. Every system you examine might have malware on it. That's the whole point of your examination, so be aware you cannot trust any data you put on that system to stay out of the attacker's hands, and anything you connect to that system might become infected. So treat it carefully. Like we try in this class, and even more in the malware analysis class, we always work in virtual machines. So whatever you do, document everything, because something bad might happen, and then you will need to have a record of what you did. If you make a mistake, just record it, and then if you have to explain your actions later to your boss or in court, you say, I reached this point, I made a mistake. Admitting it is always better than trying to cover it up. And so be careful. Don't just try to make up what you're doing live on the machine. Have a plan and do things as quickly as possible. Although, of course, something always goes wrong. And you cope. But you do have to have planned standard procedures that you stick to as much as possible. Choose tools that don't do more to the system than you have to. So typically command line tools do less harm to the system, less corruption of the evidence than GUI tools, and keep a complete log, like a cryptographic checksum of the evidence you collect, so you can verify making copies of it. And there's an article I found while I was preparing something for a corporate customer I thought was very nice, that compared the acquisition software for RAM capture from 2018 from these guys, which is really pretty nice. They asked about tools, and Memorize is a big one. Belkasoft RAM capture and FTK images are also popular. Here's a lot of tools that people use. Oh, I didn't do any expert testimony. I've not done that. I do a lot of consulting, but I have not been testifying in court. I've been offered those jobs, but so far I haven't taken them. It's an option, though. If they lay me off at the college, I might go in that direction. We'll see. I certainly could do it now. In my younger days, I wouldn't have the resume. Now I have the resume for it. I've seen people who do expert testimony, and they have a resume that's like 30 pages long. You list every conference you went to, every talk you gave, every paper you published anywhere, and you want to see a big, thick wad of that to say, I am an expert. Wham! I have all these credentials. Now I can say things. I could do that. Anyway. So, I was surprised how different. Here's the RAM used by different machines. FTK Imager is the worst. Memorize is much less. And Belkasoft, I think live RAM capture is very good. And this thing called Dump It is even better. So they're not kidding. You could choose a tool that would do a lot less damage to the memory it's imaging. And here's the number of DILs and registry keys. And again, FTK Imager and Magnet RAM capture use a ton, but these others use much less. So I was surprised that there's such a difference. And so here's the results. They all took about the same amount of time to capture the memory, but they really varied by like a factor of 10 in memory usage and registry keys and DILs, so I was surprised by that. All right, so anyway, automate the process is a good idea so that you don't make humans type commands and make mistakes. You just run something like a script. Collect the most volatile data first is a general practice. Like RAM is more volatile than the hard drive, and there are a few other things like the page file and the registers that are technically different levels of volatility, but you normally don't worry about that. Anyway, whatever you get, it's evidence. So preserve it, lock it up, make sure it's not being tampered with. Keep a written document of who gathered it and where you put it, so you'll never be able to use it in court if you don't keep records of how you gathered it, where you stored it, so you can say, I made sure that nobody was tampering with it. In a nice chain of custody, from when I seized the evidence to when I brought it right here and handed it to you, I made sure that nobody tampered with it. You have to have that. And any media you connect, make sure they don't have anything private in it, like passwords or anything, because that machine might very well be infected and sending whatever goes on there to the bad guys. So you don't want to give them any information that they shouldn't have. So use credentials other than your primary account. Don't goof around on the system and do unnecessary things. And don't try to do analysis directly on the live system. This is a poor practice. What you do is you gather the evidence and analyze it elsewhere, so you're not destroying evidence by continuing to do unnecessary operations on the main system. Besides, you can't really trust what you do on the supposedly infected system. So here's some examples of how to do it wrong. And remember, it's not just that people are idiots, just most people are not ready for instant response. They don't think they're going to get hacked. Then they get hacked. Then they have a bunch of IT staff that don't know much about security, that just know how to fix machines. And they say, deal with it. And they try to do it, but they don't even know what they're doing. And then after you have a few bad responses, you begin realizing we need to learn some instant response, and you gradually move up in maturity. So here's something people would do. Put your toolkit on the system, save the collected data back to the same system. So you're actually overriding data on the evidence system with the data you're collecting. That's unprofessional and unnecessary. Log in remotely with the domain administrator account. So you're just handing credentials to the bad guy that they can use to go everywhere. This is the old-fashioned. This was the best procedure 10 or 15 years ago. Pull out the plug, shut down the machine, and then image the hard drive. That was what forensics was supposed to be. RAM doesn't matter at all. Ignore the RAM. Turn out the plug, image the hard drive. That's it. This was the old-fashioned way you did forensics, but not anymore. Not in the modern days with live response. Yeah. Anyway, good methods. You have a network share to collect the data on a file server. You have throwaway credentials. You have a read-only folder with all the executables. And so you run the executables from the file share, and you put the data you collect on the other file share. So you do as little damage to the machine as possible, and you don't trust anything on that machine. So that's a good plan. And then once you've got the data, then you go analyze it on a known clean system. You don't try to analyze it on the suspect machine. So you have your evidence server should be air-gapped. You should be storing your evidence on a machine that is not connected to the internet and can't be modified. You should be analyzing it on a system that's not connected to the internet, and that there isn't any malware on it and such. All right. So sometimes you can't connect USB drives and other things to the system, so you often use a network share or CD-ROM or DVD, depending on what system you're trying to do, or you can have an encrypted channel for communication on there, like CryptCat or S-Tunnel. Make an encrypted network connection that you can use to send the output to another system. That's pretty common. You do a remote network capture, especially on systems like cell phones. To capture the data from a cell phone, you often can't really connect a USB drive or anything, so you just collect the data over the network to another machine. You might have some goofy operating system, some device in your network that is running some strange proprietary operating system. Like I know people have these network attack storage devices that are running some goofy OS. And in that case, you may not be able to use any standard toolkit, and you'll just have to perform a manual live response executing commands on that. Whatever command gives you the network connections and running processes or something from that system. So you'd want to plan for it, hopefully find another copy of that thing that you can practice on, and then proceed. I've seen some forensic books that talk about sometimes communicating with clubs in your area if you have really old things like an Amiga on your network, and you have to image that, and you don't know anything about Amigas, find an Amiga enthusiast club. But Now, I don't know how often that happens, but I think it happens pretty often at big companies where you have things like expensive printers running some bizarre proprietary OS from 10 years ago that nobody knows anything about. Anyway, automating your process is the best. Then you have a nice consistent thing, but this is more of a problem. These complicated exotic devices are more of a problem for police than they are for like corporate security officers, because corporations typically everybody has identical machines, so we have the parts and we know how to fix them. Police are the ones that really have this problem, where you go to a crime scene and you seize stuff, and now you just have a pile of junk. Weird electronic gadgets like cameras and strange phones and portable devices, and you're trying to get data from all that stuff, and you don't even know what it is. It's just random stuff you seized from a crime scene. They've really got a job figuring out how to get in all that stuff. Anyway, all right. So let's try some more Cahoots. That's why the telephone, the expensive toolkits you can buy can cost like $20,000. They claim they can image like 400 different kinds of phones and stuff. Just a giant suitcase full of cables and gadgets. All right, I think maybe we got everybody who's coming. All right. All right, so subject reinstalled their OS to hide evidence. Now what should you do? Yep, the hard disk image. This is a real case. This really happened to one of my instructors. They had a suspect doing something bad. They sent him a court order saying we need that laptop. And they said, gee, I just happened to sell that laptop to my attorney, and my attorney reinstalled the operating system, so all the evidence is gone. And he said, that's no problem. Just send it over anyway. I'll have no difficulty recovering evidence from that laptop. And that's when they just caved and settled the case. They knew they were hosed. Because, of course, that doesn't do it. Reinstalling the OS doesn't erase all the data on the laptop, just some of it. So if you take a hard disk image, you can recover the deleted files, and you will find quite a lot of evidence still on there. So anyway, but you do need the whole hard disk image, because you need to find the data that is no longer in the master file table. It's no longer a live data, so you're not going to find anything in a live response or a RAM image, but you are going to find slack space, areas of the hard disk that still have old data left in them. All right. So you need to find a few infected machines on a large network. So what should you do? This is the standard situation, right? You find malware, you got a fleet of 1,000 machines. You want to find out how many of them have that malware. That's live response. This is what Velociraptor is primarily designed to do, is exactly this. Perform a hunt, which will then, you choose off a nice menu of data you want, and it will push it out to all those machines and gather all the data from all those machines in a nice, organized way for you. All right, you find child pornography. Now what? This is, of course, what Apple's doing right now. Freaking out about the child porn on people's iPhones. You can't do any of this. You can't do any investigation. You have to get rid of it. Handling it is a felony. Concealing it is a felony. It's like poison. You can't touch it. Your investigation is over. That machine gets sent to the FBI, the Missing Child Exploitation Group, or there's a special government agency it has to go to, and you have to wash your hands of it and forget it. Whatever you thought you were going to get off that machine, it's over. You can't have anything to do with that stuff. It's poison. All right. Just have to get it out of your hands and file a report saying, I found it and I immediately stopped doing anything with it. I did not collect any copies of it or anything. It's going right to you guys and I'm washing my hands of everything. All right. So your investigation is going to go to court and you need complete evidence. So now what should you collect? Yep, you should do all of this. Hard disk image and RAM image anyway, and live response wouldn't hurt either. That to get the complete data. Just record it all. All right. And a jealous husband wants to get evidence from his wife's laptop. So now what should you do? Yeah, none of that. There are nations where a husband owns his wife like a slave, and the husband can tell you to invade the wife's privacy, but America is not one of them. You would need her permission to collect data from her laptop. Otherwise, you're breaking the law, violating her privacy. I had a student call me up and say, this guy came to me with this request. What should I do? And I said, don't do that. That's insane. And he said, I wasn't sure, so I just quoted a really high price so he would go away. And I said, well, that's good enough as long as you didn't do it. Anyway, so. All right. All right. And those all look like good names except live. They'll have to tell me who they are if they want their points. All right.